Can one suffer from loneliness on a planet with already 8 billion people?
Like my person, right?
Many of their apartments have turned into communes where everyone is behind the closed door of their room.
No one came by and asked how I was doing, if I slept well, how I spent my day.
So, how do we realize that we are lonely?
They don't hear me. They don't understand me.
We live in the same house, sleep in the same bed, but we are like strangers.
Everyone around me is selfish. Well, except me, of course, I'm not selfish.
In fact, a person is never truly alone, but the question is with whom he is.
Greetings, dear friends. Hello, Diana.
Hello.
Diana, before we delve into the new topic, I'd like to express gratitude to our viewers for their active participation, for the engagement in our interactive discussions, and for responding to the questions we ask them. In one of our previous videos, we shared a parable about Buddha and desires. We asked a question: which desires actually cause the most suffering for people? Friends, thank you for all the versions you've written. We are especially grateful for the explanations accompanying your answers. It was very interesting to read them and, as they say, it's time to conclude this parable with Buddha's words, who responded to his disciples that the desires that cause the most suffering are those that have been fulfilled. We were delighted and pleased to read this very answer in your comments. Well, friends, let's move on to our new topic, which also arose thanks to your activity in the comments, namely to the question posted by one of our viewers. Could you address the topic of loneliness after the death of a spouse at the age of 70 plus, seeking solace among friends and relatives? Our proposal, friends, is to discuss loneliness not only for the age group of 70 plus, but to generally talk about this phenomenon, to understand what it exists, what lies behind it, and why it concerns a certain number of people. So, shall we begin?
An interesting question, isn't it? Can one suffer from loneliness on a planet with already 8 billion people? It seems paradoxical, doesn't it? And yet, it's a very relevant common request for counseling. And it's really interesting to look into why people experience loneliness, feel lonely when there are so many people around. Clearly, the presence or absence of people is not the cause of loneliness. I'll say even more. It doesn't matter at all if there is some person around or if some person is not around. The topic of loneliness is not about having someone around. There is a very interesting saying: if you feel lonely when you are alone, you are in bad company. In fact, a person is never truly alone. But the question is with whom he is, with God or with the devil. And this is exactly what the theme of loneliness is about.
Right, listen, but...
Unexpected?
Yeah, unexpected. Two such good, I'd say hefty points. Firstly, regarding the 8 billion, naturally there are objections, right? Like, how could I feel lonely among 8 billion? It means I haven't found that special someone yet who will share my whole life, all the ups and downs, sufferings and so on. That's, the first thing that comes to mind. And why? Because you don't even consider the fact that indeed there are 8 billion of us here. As they say, no matter where you look, there are people to talk to, people to spend time with, right? But the second point is that a person is never truly alone. Well, that's a much deeper question. It requires explanations.
Of course, I understand that. Well, let's just first figure out together how the state of loneliness is formed. Because loneliness is truly a state, it's the way a person feels about themselves. Yes, I'll even clarify, it's how they evaluate their state. So how do we realize that we are lonely? Well, in our example on the question posed, there is a specific situation. Someone close has passed away, and therefore someone feels lonely. In other words, there is a certain condition that triggers loneliness, meaning when some person is not around, I'm lonely. I'm lonely if I'm not understood. If the people around me aren't the right ones, so I feel lonely. Not the people I need, right? Or I'm lonely because I feel nobody needs me. So these are the most common thoughts that usually come to mind when the topic of loneliness arises. And you know what? These comments sound exactly the same in our heads, no matter our gender, age, where we live, or what education we have. And that's also a really interesting point.
Yes, I've often heard and even had these thoughts myself about why do you feel lonely? Not my person, right? Or maybe it's just not the right group of people. And that's also a good point you made. They don't hear me, they don't understand me, and it really makes you think. So it turns out loneliness isn't about being somewhere alone, and it's not about being somewhere alone with someone else or in a big group. That was a good point. It's a state.
Absolutely right. And now we are going to figure out what the state actually is. So let's say a loved one has passed away. But what is it that really makes a person suffer? Who's going to make me breakfast now? Who's going to listen to me now? It feels like no one cares about what I have to say. The only one who cared isn't here anymore. And it makes me wonder, is it a spouse's job to always listen to everything over and over again? Even if it's the same thing? Are we sure and do we actually think about how interested our loved ones are in what we want to show them, in what we tell them? Or, well, they are our loved ones, so they should listen, while others are not interested. Children are more honest in this regard. They say, Mom, listen, I'm not interested in what you're talking about right now. Go tell Dad. While adults often pretend to listen, so we end up repeating the same things over and over again. So, if we talk about suffering, the root of suffering due to the absence of someone around, a loved one often lies in this consumerist attitude, meaning another person is integrated into some sort of scheme of my hypothetical comfort, and suddenly they are out of that scheme. Why do I say hypothetical? Because what about the theme of being lonely together, which has almost become customary for anyone? We live in the same house, sleep in the same bed, but we are like strangers. The thing is, the theme of loneliness isn't just about people who actually live alone. Okay, someone lives alone for some reason. But the theme of loneliness is much more prevalent in people who live in families, and often in large families. This loneliness among relatives and close ones is actually the biggest part of the theme of loneliness.
Yeah, it is surprising information too. Why? Because initially, when you hear about loneliness, a certain image of a person comes to mind. Say, an old lady or an old man sitting alone at home, sipping tea from their favorite cups or watching TV, or sitting alone in the park on a bench feeding pigeons. That's the picture of loneliness.
Or someone whose personal life hasn't worked out, as they say. But in fact, that's not the case, really. Very often, people who live in large families come and say, I really wish I could talk to someone. I really need someone to listen to me. And this is said by someone with a family of 5 or 6 people, sometimes even more. There is another very interesting point. In families, in large families, or just in families, people often have this thought: I wish I could be alone for a while. I'm tired of this noise, this hustle, this endless have to. I wish they'd all go away for a little while. Right? Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
And in fact, if you look at how many families live, many of their apartments have turned into communes where everyone is behind the closed door of their room. Well, unless there are small kids in the house, that's a unifying element that runs around the house and opens all the doors. And then everyone has a wish, if only they grew up faster. This noise disappeared from the house and silence set in. They grew up, they moved apart, silence set in the space, but not in the mind. Loneliness. What is it really? It is suffering, right? A person feels very bad when he feels lonely, or it seems to him that he is lonely. And suffering is an emotion. The emotion of fear. No one needs me, no one cares about me. And of course, these thoughts make you sad. And then a person gets angry with oneself, with others, and with the circumstances for everything turning out this way. And so it is these emotions that create this state, the one I mentioned at the very beginning. The feeling bad state is the state that consists of these emotions. But what have I listed before? No one needs me, no one cares about me. What's the point of my life? Those are thoughts, thoughts that trigger these emotions. So if we talk about who actually makes us suffer, it's the one who has convinced us that no one needs or cares about me. But is it someone who comes and tells me, you're lonely now, no one needs you, so just sit there and suffer? No, it's our thoughts that persuade us, thoughts we pay attention to, thoughts that sound in our heads. And thoughts are the manifestation of the work of consciousness. So, in fact, consciousness convinces people that they need to suffer, in this case, to suffer from loneliness. And consciousness? Well, look, by the way, it's the same consciousness that long ago suggested the person to dream about being alone and finally get some rest from everyone. You see the contradictions? And the question arises: why does this happen? What's wrong with me, anyway? When people are around me, I want to get away from them, and when there is no one around, I suddenly start suffering. And every time, this suffering is actually triggered by thoughts in my head. What's wrong with them? The thing is, the program called consciousness, and consciousness is a program. It will never allow a person to be satisfied with what they have at the moment. Never. And this needs to be understood. Because the task of this program is to trigger emotions in people, negative emotions. Let me remind you that any situation, any topic that we discuss in our episodes, we consider from the perspective of knowledge about the dual nature of humans, that every person has an animal part, the body and consciousness. And I would say that's exactly this suffering, complaining, always dissatisfied part. And also every person has a spiritual component, the soul and personality, the one who each of us really is, the true self of a person. And when the personality directs its attention to these negative, selfish, dissatisfied thoughts, it sort of aligns itself with the program and starts to manifest itself as a selfish being. Because, as a matter of fact, these thoughts are always very selfish. I listed how do I, how is with me, how is for me. And it's very important, really important for every person to understand this, because there is this opinion that people are selfish, that all people are selfish. No, people aren't selfish. Selfishness resides in only a small part of each person, which is consciousness. But that's just a part of the human being. And when a person truly directs their attention to thoughts, that is, to the manifestation of the work of this program, then they manifest themselves as selfish. But when a person directs their attention to the soul, to that flow of love that comes from God to this personality, then they become human. Then they become loving beings. It's precisely when they immerse themselves in the stream of love, when they connect with it. It's all so simple when you understand the true nature of human beings, how each of us is designed.
And then in reality, a person doesn't feel loneliness.
No, of course not.
Not that oppressive, suffocating feeling that brings sorrow. Thank you for voicing these thoughts that sound in people's heads. They're really all about self-pity. I mean, it's selfishness in its purest form. And of course, if a person, just due to certain circumstances, isn't aware of his dual nature, doesn't know he is a personality, potentially a spiritual, immortal being, that within him there's also a dead part of this material world, which is his consciousness, both primary and secondary. And they have their own habits, their own ways of behaving, in general, their own patterns. And naturally, that's when these seemingly paradoxical and polar situations arise, right? While with people wanting to be alone, that's also a very interesting point. While by myself, craving company, right? But what difference does it make where you are, who you are with, if your mind is dominated by consciousness, if your mind is dominated by thoughts aimed solely at stimulating your ego? Now I understand that many people who seek counseling, probably not only about loneliness, will say, well, how come? Why am I selfish? Guys, well, just listen. They don't hear me. They don't understand me. I'm so lonely because there's no one around me who would understand me with the half word, from a gesture, from a, well, I don't know, just a wink of an eye, a certain facial expression. Because you often hear these stories, he or she or they, someone, I don't know, is attached to their parents, or someone is attached to their brothers, sisters, friends, partners, or whatever. All I had to do was just look at him and he understood everything. There it was, his longing. What did he understand? What do you want from him? What should he do? Where should he hide, run? How should he behave? What not to say? That's what he understood. So, is this about loneliness? Or again about the same notorious power and domination? What's this about?
But Sasha, still I understand that for many people, especially those who will listen to our broadcast for the first time, right, still it will be an unexpected emphasis that loneliness is about selfishness, about the dual nature of human being. Unfortunately, we're not taught this, whereas this is what children should be learning. I don't know, from a very young age, they should know about it. And of course, there is, this resistance. I just know that, well, how can it be? My thoughts leading me astray, they're selfish. Okay, let's just quickly go through the stages together, how this happens with a person. Basically, in order to gain this experience, to avoid any debate or resistance in the mind, any doubts about it, it's great to write down the thoughts, precisely write down, that arise in a person in a state of loneliness. So how it all begins. Morning. A person opens his eyes and the first thought, I'm alone. That's it, such a melancholic thing. And then the person starts scanning the room with his eyes, looks at the bed nearby. There was someone here just recently, right? But now they're gone. Shifted his gaze to some photographs on the dresser on the wall. Memories of something came flooding in. That's it. The mood drops. Tears are welling up in the eyes already, and then the thoughts. What's the point of getting up and doing something? I used to do this for someone. It used to make someone happy. But now no one needs it. And it's not necessarily that there is no partner nearby, that they've died, for example. No, it could be, no one cares about me at all. My wife has her own interests. My children have their own interests. Who needs me? Will anyone notice that I won't leave the room? And if the person continues to sink further into these thoughts, lie there in these thoughts, he really won't feel like getting up. And the more attention he puts into these thoughts, the more they'll unfold like a snowball rolling downhill. And it's an endless stream of thoughts. As much as we lie there thinking about it, that's how much these thoughts will echo in our heads in different variations. And the further it goes, the less strength and desire to get up and do something. Yes, this stream can be interrupted. The person will eventually get up, shuffle around the apartment, aimlessly trying to watch TV, switch to something, read a book, but it all doesn't work. I'm talking right now, and it's already so melancholic, and I already want to break out of this routine. It pulls you in like an unpleasant wheel. That's how it happens. Under no circumstances should you lie down and listen to these thoughts. No, you need to get up and write them down. Just please don't write novels. Write down everything that sounds in your head for 10 minutes on a piece of paper or a notebook, a diary or whatever, and you'll immediately feel immense relief. Get that experience at the very least. You'll want to go wash your face and make yourself some tea. And when you drink that tea, please come back to the writing and be sure to reread it. And then you'll have your own experience, your own understanding of how selfish suffering is. Any suffering, no matter under what guise it comes, is always very selfish. You won't find any other thoughts there except I, about me, for me, how about me, what about me, why did this happen to me? That's it. There won't be anything else there. But at least you won't doubt anymore that loneliness really is about selfishness. Suffering is always selfishness. And furthermore, it's crucial to understand that when we delve into our thoughts, we will always experience loneliness. Always. I would even say that immersing ourselves in the stream of thoughts is akin to being imprisoned in some solitary cell. In fact, consciousness is that solitary cell devised by the devil for each individual to separate them from the whole world of loving beings, from the world of God. That's what consciousness separates us from. Because when a person is in communion with God, they are in touch with the infinite world of loving and living ones. And therefore, this person simply cannot experience loneliness. And it's very important for every person to gain this experience. Firstly, just to understand and accept this information, and then to gain the experience of what it's like to be in communion with God, to feel this difference, what it means to immerse oneself in this stream of thoughts. Well, thank God everyone has this experience, or rather, unfortunately, everyone has it. But to gain another experience, an experience where you feel something real, alive, very own, and in this very own, alive response, there is no suffering, there is no loneliness, because there are no such emotions there, neither fear, nor sadness, nor grief, nor anger, let alone. When this experience comes, all doubts vanish.
You know, there might be this objection. What do you mean? How's that? What do you mean they are not mine? How come they are not mine? They come to me, right? It's like he, she, they are not always with me, but thoughts belong to me. They are always here. You're right. In the morning, not even in the morning. While you are getting ready to work, while you are commuting to work, to some meeting, going home, these thoughts are really always with you. You know, excuse me for saying, the specialist tells me that thoughts are not good. Tells me about some honesty with myself, tells me about some right and necessary points, saying I need to reconsider something in this life. But it's different with thoughts. What do? They help me to pity myself, to tune myself into that way where everyone around is to blame, but not me. Like, no one helps me, especially, this is a good thought. I'm left alone, no one needs me, no one came by and asked how I was doing, if I slept well, how I spent my day. How do you give up those thoughts? Are they really bad? Do they bring the suffering and despair you talked about? No way. It's those who live nearby that bring me this suffering. And what about the thoughts? They care about me. They show me how good I am, how right I am, while everyone around me is selfish. Well, except me, of course, I am not selfish. And I came to you for help, to figure all this out. You see, what a strange paradox. I do realize that what I'm saying now might seem sarcastic, guys, but it's not sarcasm.
It's not sarcasm.
It's not sarcasm.
You just honestly voiced what's in your head, because the same commentary sounds in your head, in my head, and in the heads of our viewers. At the beginning, it was for a reason that I said pay attention to the way these motives of suffering and loneliness sound in our heads. They are absolutely the same, regardless of where people are, what they are doing, their age, gender, and so on. Because it's a program, it works the same for everyone. So right now, you are just voicing how this program works. But if we talk about returning to the question of honesty, why did I mention it? It's important to be honest with yourself. Yes, all these thoughts sound in our heads just as you said. But answer yourself honestly. Not us, not someone else, but yourself. Do you feel comfortable being alone with yourself? With your thoughts? Are you happy? If everything is fine with your thoughts, why do you constantly want to change something? After all, you constantly want to change something. You try to change the people around you, the situations you find yourself in. But in fact, nothing changes. Why? Because the main source of problems you constantly carry with you. And this source of problems is precisely these thoughts in your head. While I was listening to you, listening to their thoughts, I thought it would be interesting to propose an experiment to our viewers to make them look at the familiar situation differently, in a new way. If at the moment when you are supposedly sure you hear the understanding of the situation in your head, I mean that you understand something because of what sounds in your head, write it down. Just write it all down on a piece of paper, precisely the way it sounds, and then try to remove those thoughts. Just for a moment, imagine what the situation would be like without those thoughts. Or, as an intelligent person, as a person with intellect, brainstorm other variants of possible interpretation of this situation. After all, there is always more than one understanding. Just ask your loved ones near you, your housemates. What do you think? Did this person really act right or wrong? Would it be good or bad if we do something? And listen to a completely different opinion. Because at that moment they have other thoughts in their heads. They simply chose them. And there you already have a difference, and this makes you realize that, in fact, any situation is perceived only through the thoughts that a person accepts at the moment. No other way. And if you remove them, what will the situation be like? Any situation. Neutral. Even the death of a loved one. I always bring up this example because it's shocking, and there is this most frequent objection, like, no, but Diana, okay, some situations might be neutral, but the death of a loved one, it can't be neutral. But it is neutral. Guys, it's just a fact. The body died, the person is no longer here. I lost my job, it's a fact. It's neutral in its essence. But when comments start sounding in our heads, oh my God, what do I do now? What am I supposed to do? How will I cope with this? Why did this happen to me? Why did I listen to those people who advised me? Once these thoughts that start sounding, observe how your state immediately changes, instantly. Look at something you are indifferent to. Notice what the state is like, and observe how it changes as soon as a thought arises. It's really great to do this if you just sit down, relax, close your eyes, and just sit and observe your body. How even the reactions in your body change, how your breathing changes depending on the thoughts that arise in your head that moment, and how they captivate the person. This will already give you a lot of understanding of what affects our state, what affects our well-being. Try to observe. Sasha, there is another question here. People in general are not used to observing themselves in this way. All our observation boils down to observing the thoughts and desires that arise in me, and emotions. Many people can't even clearly define their emotions. They can't say what emotion they are in right now. This confuses many people. I don't even know what emotion I'm experiencing right now. Am I sad, scared, or angry?
A good experiment, indeed. A good exercise. I really hope our viewers will try it and also share their results, whatever they may be. By the way, this is the most important thing we also talked about in many episodes. Guys, free yourself from expectations. As they say, just do it. In this case, observe. Observe. If you see something, write to us. If you don't understand something, write to us. Because together it's more interesting, more fun, and much more productive. And I would like to go back to the second point. Despite the fact that you have already mentioned it several times in our conversation today, I would like to return to this emphasis regarding the fact that a person is never alone, because it's really important, and it's the root cause of the state a person experiences. Also, this point mentioned at the beginning of the video that a person is never alone. He is either with the devil or with God. He is either alone or filled with love and life. And of course, loneliness is not even on the horizon. Because a person is busy with something completely different. He's engaged in communication. He's engaged in communication with his dear, with his probably closest, not probably, but with the closest and the most loving being that can exist in his life. And when a person understands this, he understands one thing, that loneliness, firstly, is his choice, and secondly, it is an illusion that doesn't really exist. But all this happens simply because we are a bit selfish. We are a bit selfish, and we just don't want to look at ourselves, not even at life differently. Why don't we want to look? That's already a question for each of us who find themselves in such a situation. Who is faced with loneliness, who is looking for the answers to how to get out of there, why is this happening? But the door out of this solitary confinement cell, as you mentioned, is in each person. And entering, it is not that difficult after all, especially when it's open, and it's always open.
After all, most of you are now lonely in your souls, even among your relatives and friends. You take care of them while they don't take care of you, right? You do everything for them while they are so shameless. Look how selfishness, yes? That's exactly the reason. It's not you who should be loved, but you should love everyone and not ask or want anything from anyone. If you love someone for something, if you love someone so that they love you and take care of you, you're selfish and you don't love anyone but yourself. Love is altruistic. You should get rid of all this bad stuff, of all thoughts and everything. Then there will be no loneliness inside. Then there will be an understanding that the soul is cognate. And all our personalities are also relatives, let's say, very close ones, all our personalities. So we are much dearer and nearer than it seems. While everything else comes from the devil, from the spirit of confrontation, from our consciousness. It divides, it destroys, it produces emotions, it wants, it forces, it hates, and forces us to do that. The question is, who are we? Egoists? Are we slaves to the spirit of hatred and confrontation? Or are we human beings and loving beings after all? And everything depends on this very decision.
The theme of loneliness is very closely related to the meaning of life. It's precisely about who a person is really with. Because in fact, the question, what am I living for, is a question that constantly accompanies the topic of loneliness. When a person says to himself, who needs me? No one cares about me. There is always this concluding chord, this question, what's the purpose of my life? What am I living for? And the theme of loneliness is a great opportunity to finally deal with this question. I will never tire of repeating that there are two most important questions in every person's life. Who am I? And what's the purpose of my life? What's the purpose of human life? Not just mine personally, because in fact, the purpose of life for all people is universal. It is the gaining of life, eternal life. It is spiritual liberation, period, and there is no other purpose. While what we are used to considering the purpose of life, such as being a doctor, a pilot, the best cook, I don't know, a designer, something else, is just a social role, and it's an opportunity to do something good and useful for other people in this material world. And the most important thing for each person is to realize that each of us is a potentially immortal being who has only one goal, to return home, to return to the world of God, to return as a mature, spiritually free being. And when you have this understanding and correct answers to these questions, then the topic of loneliness doesn't arise, because there comes understanding and even better knowledge and experience of who I really am, and a true goal appears. The goal that gives understanding of what I am here for and what this material, temporary world is all about. And then the issue of loneliness disappears. Why does it disappear? because a person has a choice and knowledge of what he can replace this theme of loneliness with. Because as long as a person understands that his only interlocutor is thoughts in his head, this is the only thing he can put his attention to. He kind of has no alternative to escape from this topic. But when a person realizes that he has a soul, and the soul is a particle of eternity from the world of God, and the souls of all people are the same, and this is what, by the way, unites us, just as a unified goal unites us to return home. And when a person realizes that, and gains the experience of communicating with his soul, through the soul with God, that's when the theme of loneliness disappears. That's when a person understands what you, Sasha, have already mentioned. He gains the experience of communicating with the most loving being. And then, what loneliness can there be? After all, loneliness, as well as all other themes of suffering, is always a cry for love. I'm not loved, there is not enough love in my life. But there is the source of this infinite love in each of us, and each one of us is capable of discovering this source, to become a part of this love. And then this dreary plea, loneliness, I lack love, it disappears from a person's life. And you know, the theme of loneliness pushes us to seek the answer to the question of what unites and what separates people. Isn't that true? We already figure out what separates us. First of all, every person has already experienced that neither a shared bed, nor a shared house, business, or even blood relations unites people. Why? Well, why would that be? Why so? After all, these are my relatives. Who else could be closer? And yet we can constantly hear the issue of loneliness among our relatives and close ones. Because the purpose of such unification is temporary, and it is dictated by the same consciousness. And I hope we have already clearly identified that it is thoughts in our head that separate people. When a person really plunges into these thoughts about how miserable he is, that he is separated from everyone, that everyone else is happy, but he is the only unhappy one, no one understands him. This is the thought that pushes away all other people from a person, separates him. He's separated. No one understands me. We're all over there and I'm here. You're happy there, but I'm miserable here. These are the thoughts that separate us all. But when a person immerses in love, in God's love, then there is a transformation within himself and in his life. Love, true love for God, love for people, that's the only thing that can unite people. Only true love. Because, as I already said, each of us has a soul, and the souls of all people are the same. And that's what, in fact, makes us the dearest and closest. And we all have the same goal. And everyone walks the path in his own way. But the essence and overcoming of this path is the same: to rid ourselves of this power of consciousness, of the power of the demon in our heads. And so, this shared goal, I'd put it this way, that what can unite us is a common goal, the pursuit of life, the pursuit of love. That's what can truly unite all people. Actually, the way out of loneliness should always involve action, action directed towards helping other people. In fact, when a person says, I'm lonely, but it's you who feels lonely, that means you should go to people rather than expecting people to come to you, right? When I keep repeating the same phrases all the time because they're so standard, no one needs me, no one cares about me. But let's flip those phrases around. Who do you need? Who do you care about? And honestly answer this question, each person to themselves, and that will already be the first step towards real unity. It's the first step towards turning to people, towards interacting with people. There is this wonderful project that has already united a great number of people all over the world, the Creative Society. I can say for sure that the participants of the Creative Society project do not feel lonely. If any person joins this project, at the very least, he'll have a huge number of friends all over the world, and then there is no loneliness for him anymore. He'll have so many tasks, so many new things to do that, excuse me, there will be no time to suffer from loneliness. There simply won't be time for it. If you manage to get 5 or 6 hours of sleep, that would be wonderful, because the Creative Society project actually has a huge number of tasks. Tasks for 8 billion people, yet only millions are involved so far. So, in reality, every person is needed, very much needed. You, my friend, are very much needed by all people. You just don't know it yet, but you have a chance to find out about it. And share this experience with other people. If we talk about bringing something good for other people, then that's the best thing each person can bring to their neighbor, to their loved one, to their close person, acquaintance, stranger. Tell them about the Creative Society project. Tell them about the wonderful world we can build together. The thing is, most people don't understand and underestimate the opportunities we all have if we unite our efforts. For example, what kind of loneliness are we talking about? Look at what's happening with the planet. Yeah, with the planet. It's time for each of us to emerge from the shell that consciousness has stuffed us into and start looking around us. Look at the world, what's happening, and take on much greater responsibility than just get up, washed, ate, went to work, came back, ate, washed, went to bed, and so on, day after day. And all this accompanied by this unceasing gramophone record playing in our heads, constantly commenting on how everything's bad, how everything's wrong, who owes me what, and how others treat me. Let's come out of this shell. We are human beings, after all. We have immense potential within us, and before us lies a vast world of possibilities. And I'll repeat once more, the best way out of loneliness is actions for the benefit of other people. Because in fact, human development is overcoming selfishness within oneself, constant overcoming of selfishness. That's the essence, that's the law of development. And by the way, a person can develop infinitely, and therein lies the uniqueness of the human being, whereas selfishness is the path of loneliness, suffering, and death. Ask yourself, which path do you choose?
Right.
And that's it. I think the answer is obvious.
Guys, even if you are the ultimate, most hardened egoist in the world, you'll understand, you'll realize when you just learn about the Creative Society project that it is for you. And you won't find better living condition than in the Creative Society. But of course, even if you pursue solely your personal selfish goals, there's still no shame in it. You still need help from other people, no matter how strange and paradoxical it may sound. So join. Spread the word about this project to everyone, and indeed, we have a chance and an opportunity to live differently. Just then, the first emphasis that was sounded in our conversation today, that there are 8 billion people around, and yet we feel lonely. But it won't sound paradoxical, because
Go to these 8 billion people and tell them about the best, tell them. Why do people say, no one cares about me, no one wants to listen to me? Guys, what is there to listen to? How much longer are we going to exchange information about how bad everything is for us, what illnesses we have, what we are suffering from, and so on? Of course, it's not interesting to listen to. We are already tired of listening to it. Let's talk about the health capsule. Let's talk about the replicate, about FFGs, about universal basic income of $10,000 per month. Tell them about it. Well, first of all, find out what I'm talking about right now.
What are these FFGs? What is this health capsule? And why would someone be given $10,000 monthly?
you will definitely spark interest in your interlocutors, absolutely. Because this is new information, this is interesting information. This is information that will change your life and the lives of those people you'll talk to about it. So if you share with other people, do share something new and interesting, and only the best. There is nothing better than the information about the Creative Society project. So, I don't know, when you know about this project, the issue of loneliness disappears instantly, just naturally. But in general, of course, it's very important and foremost to remember, understand, and set out that each of us has a connection with infinity, with the infinite world of loving beings inside ourselves. And each person can discover this source within themselves. Open up to this God's love within you, and you'll forget about loneliness forever.
Right.
When you do not pay attention to anything that happens,
To nothing.
but confidently advance towards your goal.
Of course, you generate love and send it to the spiritual world. And what do you get in return? Happiness and joy. And when you live, pardon me, by God's love, then within you, a countless number of angels sound in you, who sing the most beautiful melody. Isn't that true? How can a person be sad when he experiences love sent from the spiritual world? How can he be unhappy if he is in God's love? In no way.
When the best interlocutor is next to him, which is love.
100%. Therefore, my friends, let's learn to love. If we do not know how, and let's start with a simple thing, let's love each other. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, friends.